He's a man born into power, the heart of the axis of evil.
Kim Jong Il was a paranoid psychopath, one of the most evil dictators of all time.
He tortures and executes hundreds of thousands of his own people, with his finger held closely to the button.
North Korea is a regime arming with missiles and weapons of mass destruction while starving its citizens.
It's about, if you attack us, we'll fire a nuclear missile at you. And maybe I'm enough of a nut to do it.
This is the story of a man with an insatiable desire for power and fame. A man raised to be a dictator who rules with sadistic cruelty. North Korea's Kim Jong Il. July the 8th, 1994. At 82 years of age, Kim Il-sung, North Korea's dictator for 36 years, is dead. Despite the reality of his regime, which has been one of the most ruthless and tyrannical the world has ever known, Kim Il-sung is worshipped as a near god, who North Koreans believe led them to victory over Japan in World War II and America in the Korean War. With his death, the world's first communist dynasty is born, as his son, Kim Jong Il, inherits the mantle of power.
North Korea has its founding father who's died and gone to heaven, where he presides, and you have his living representative, blood and spirit, and the lineage goes on.
But Kim Jong Il inherits a disastrous situation. Despite his father's attempts at total self-sufficiency, North Korea has to rely on its communist neighbors buying its goods. When the Soviet Union collapses in 1991, it has catastrophic effects on the North Korean economy, compounded by several disastrous harvests that leave people across the country starving. The myth of a socialist paradise is falling apart at the seams.
Ever since Kim Jong-il got involved with everything in politics, food distribution gradually started to pale. In the morning, I would see more than 10 street kids lying dead on the way to work. Back then, a lot of people died around me. A lot of kids without parents died from starvation.
Remarkably, North Korean propaganda portrays the famine as an arduous march everyone is forced to go on, including their new ruler Kim Jong Il, who is seen touring the country, reportedly surviving on just a bowl of rice a day.
He made the case that he, almost more than anyone else, was suffering from this arduous march. This image of austerity he was trying to give to his people, that, he had one outfit. He ate such little amounts that he had no need to defecate to go to the bathroom anymore. His body had adapted to not needing fuel.
But in reality, while his people starve, Kim Jong-il is living the high life.
He was having lobster flown in. He was dining on French wine. He was Hennessy's largest single paying customer. This man liked his good food, What's all that noise? Oh, it's the starving masses. Oh, God. He was literally like that. It's the kind of evil where there is no feeling. There's just emptiness. Those starving people howling out there mean nothing to me.
Rather than introduce simple market reforms like China and Russia that would keep his people alive, selfishly, Kim Jong Il is only interested in his own survival.
He didn't do it because he believed that such a policy would make people too independent, too difficult to control, and in the end of the day, too dangerous.
To finance his extravagant lifestyle and keep himself in power, he runs the government like a mafia-style criminal enterprise.
There was talk of their involvement in various illicit activities, everything from ivory trading through to being one of the largest producers of methamphetamine. They were probably the world's finest ever forgers of $100 bills, American $100 bills. And I think this is one of the great contradictions of the time of Kim Jong Il. You can create perfect fake $100 bills, and yet, you can't grow enough corn to feed the population.
While Kim enriches himself, he deviously comes up with a way of getting someone else to pay to keep the North Korean people alive. He's going to terrify the West into sending them food. As well as building the world's fourth biggest army, Kim Jong Il secretly develops nuclear weapons.
North Korea all along intended to become a nuclear state. Their objective was to create a bargaining position, a leverage, and that they were willing to give this up for some kind of guarantees of regime survival.
Kim makes sure the West knows exactly what he's up to.
Usually what they do is they start leaking the information about their nuclear program, deliberately so, and maybe test a nuclear and/or missile test. They suggest negotiations as a way to solve the crisis they themselves had just created. Most of the world sign with relief and give them concessions.
Through clever nuclear brinkmanship, Kim Jong Il gets his most hated enemy to bail him out.
When American aid comes into the country, the people of North Korea are told that these are reparations from the Americans for their attack, their imperialistic attack on North Korea in the Korean War.
And even though food is now pouring in, Kim Jong Il continues to escalate his nuclear arsenal.
It's about, if you attack us, if you do anything to us that we don't like, we'll fire a nuclear missile at you. Game over. And maybe, just maybe, I'm unstable enough and mad enough and enough of a nut to do it.
The North Korean dictator's nuclear threat isn't just to get the world to feed his people. His country has been so cut off, it's regarded as irrelevant in world affairs. But nukes get him noticed. It feeds his ego.
Kim Jong Il was a master manipulator at the international level. And he loved that aspect of making America, subdominant to him, submissive to him. And we wanted to make sure he didn't have nuclear weapons. He ended up with them anyway.
It's the cruel contradiction of Kim Jong Il's North Korea. While billions are spent on the army and nukes, his people are terrified and starving, surviving only through international handouts. In 2002, Kim Jong Il reaches out to Japan for talks about aid. As a former sworn enemy, he feels he needs to offer them something first. But what he offers is a startling admission of guilt. He says in the 1970s, his secret agents kidnapped Japanese citizens, including Megumi Yakuda, who was only 13 years old at the time. Because Kim Jong Il had become obsessed with spying.
He wanted adventures, usually completely unnecessary. The worst example was decision to kidnap a large number of Japanese citizens to be used as language teachers for the North Korean spies in training. At least 13 Japanese citizens were abducted, as the North Korean government eventually admitted itself. But this seems to be only part of the total, which is probably a few dozen.
It's a level of state-sponsored depravity the rest of the world could barely believe. But it's only what you'd expect from a man raised to be a dictator. Right from the get-go, the future North Korean dictator Kim Jong Il's life is based on a lie. The official state report says he's born in circumstances that would make even Jesus blush.
It's said that when Kim Jong Il was born, a glacier on the lake on Mount Paektu, which is the most famous mountain in Korea, cracked. Double rainbow appeared in the sky. A new star appeared in the heavens. Cranes, which is the national bird of Korea, flew across the sky to announce the birth of Kim Jong Il.
The reality is, he's born in the fog of World War II.
Kim Jong Il was born Yuri Kim on the Soviet military base near Khabarovsk. But it's impossible to admit it for the North Koreans, so they made up a story about him born on the Korean soil.
His father, Kim Il-sung, is a commander fighting for the communist resistance struggle in the far east of Russia. With Soviet backing, Kim's aim is to liberate the Korean peninsula from Japanese control. In 1945, Japan is forced to surrender after America brings the country to its knees. But when Kim Jong-il's father, Kim Il-sung, returns to North Korea, the story of his son's birth isn't the only lie his people are fed.
It is a consistent distortion of history. Many North Koreans actually believe that Japan was defeated in World War II by Kim Il-sung's resistance movement.
With the Americans firmly in control in the south of the peninsula, and the Russians and Chinese supporting Kim Il-sung in the north, Korea becomes divided. The future dictator Kim Jong-il is just 4 years old when his father brings the family to the new northern capital, Pyongyang. Communist propaganda depicts his childhood as heroic under his father's glorious rise to power. But it couldn't be further from the truth, according to reports from defectors. Some say his descent into evil begins at an early age. In 1948, Kim Jong-il and his younger brother are allowed to play together in the pool behind the family's mansion. For whatever reason, something goes horribly wrong. Their horseplay turns nasty. The younger brother drowns. It's rumored Kim Jong-il is responsible.
If there's the possibility that he actually drowned his brother, it shows that antisocial acts and that even murder will not be too removed from his daily behavior.
This story has always been spun in two different ways. It has often been presented by those wishing to attack Kim Jong Il as he is inherently evil. However, that gets spun another way, which is to sort of show, again, his hard man credentials, that, you know, you don't want to mess with Kim Jong Il. Don't take on Kim Jong Il.
Having seemingly little feelings for the loss of his brother, it is the loss of another close family member just a year later that truly devastates Kim Jong Il. In 1949, when he is just 7, his mother suffers complications from an ectopic pregnancy and dies.
If he had a mother, he would have had a sort of controlling hand. And without that, it seems he kind of grew up in a world where, you know, interacting with him was very dangerous for everyone else and very safe for him.
It leaves the young Kim desperate for his father's attention. But Kim Il-sung has more pressing concerns. At dawn on June 25th, 1950, he begins one of the most brutal and pointless conflicts of the 20th century. The Korean War is as close to a Third World War as we've ever seen. Kim Il-sung invades the South, determined to turn it communist. But an American-led United Nations army pushes him back. Seeing their communist ally in trouble, China invades and pushes the Americans back. The war ends in stalemate. No peace treaty is ever signed.
People forget that the Korean War has never technically ended. So many families were split between those in North Korea and those in South Korea. And for those families in South Korea, it was as if the other side of their family had gone into a black hole.
Both sides agree to a demilitarized zone that still divides the two countries today. The Korean War instills in Kim Il-sung and his son, Kim Jong Il, a lifelong fear and loathing of America. They go on to build a vast million-man army to make sure the North can never be invaded again.
One of the major ways that they maintain power is through a sort of theatrical victimhood. Everything is always about this continued struggle, the struggle against American imperialism that dates back to the Korean War in their minds.
The demilitarized zone is actually the most heavily militarized border in the world. A 4-kilometer wide, 120-kilometer long stretch of uninhabited countryside.
The DMZ is a strip that goes across the middle of the country, separating the two armies. And it's the most completely misnamed piece of real estate in Korea. There was an American general here many years ago, commander-in-chief of US forces, famously used to say to the press, "There ain't nothing D about that MZ."
Skirmishes are frequent. Just a few years after the zone is introduced, American, South Korean, and North Korean troops are involved in an ugly confrontation. With the war and the DMZ isolating the country, North Korea decides to go it alone.
혁명의 영도자는 일찍이 없었습니다.
Kim Il-sung decrees North Korea must now be entirely self-sufficient, never again relying on China or Russia to bail it out. In 1955, he declares a policy of North Korean self-reliance, known as Juche.
Juche theory united the country under a blend of Marxism-Leninism, Korean mythology, and of course Confucianism.
Under Juche, North Korea will feed itself, arm itself, and develop without any input from the rest of the world. It's a system Kim Il-sung uses to establish a one-man rule over the country. The masses must now submit to the great leader. But while he becomes a father to a nation, he's not much of a father to his son. Kim Jong Il is desperate for his attention and approval, but the supreme leader has started a new family. He becomes both spoiled and resentful.
Kim Jong Il grew up very sheltered and wasn't told no. And one could imagine that you need to be told no to develop some sort of boundaries on what you can do and what you can't do. And of course, if you've been raised by the supreme leader, imagine what that's going to do to your ego.
As a member of the communist elite, he isn't forced into 10 years of military service like other boys his age. Instead, he develops an interest in the arts. It's said he becomes obsessed with Elvis Presley and wanting to be a star himself. He demands his father's diplomats bring him foreign films, completely banned to the rest of the population.
He watched everything from Japanese gangster flicks and erotic flicks to Hollywood to Bollywood. But it seems like he preferred, the kind of Hollywood blockbuster mainstream films. The James Bond films were his favorite films. He loved Rambo.
He would probably make a good movie producer. Nonetheless, he was born to be a dictator.
After graduating from the Kim Il-sung University in 1964, Kim Jong Il is given a position in the Workers' Party. His father soon promotes him to a government role he thinks he'll enjoy.
Kim Il-sung realized that, this kid's been sitting in cinemas his whole childhood, he's obsessed with films, and Kim Jong-il found himself suddenly catapulted from civil servant with no clear role into running the whole of the country's propaganda system.
It's the perfect position for a young man desperate to ingratiate himself with his father. He wants to spread the myth of him as a godlike figure who won the Korean War. By elevating him to such heights, Kim Jong Il hopes to one day take the reins of power himself. He orders statues and paintings of Kim Il-sung to be displayed throughout North Korea.
Every single home should display portrait of Kim Il-sung, and these portraits had to be treated, cleaned, and replaced according to specially designed rules, and it was a crime not to follow such rules.
Thanks to Kim Jong-il, the cult of personality takes hold throughout the country.
He was the one who intensified the personality cult of the father to the point that even visiting Soviets and Chinese who were okay with Stalinism and Maoism thought, man, this is over the top. It's kind of the mirror image of a religion of the worst sort. It is like a cult. And the founding father remains as the supreme sort of being in the cult, if you like.
By building up the cult of his father, Kim Jong-il hopes he will one day be anointed his successor. His only fear is his younger stepbrother may be chosen instead. So in maneuvering for the top job, he takes out some insurance. It's rumored he starts spying. on his father. He has Kim Il-sung bugged to see if he is secretly considering his stepbrother over him. It enables him to identify and remove anyone who might not support his taking over. Nam Il is a partisan who fought alongside Kim's father in World War II. But when he starts asking questions about Kim Jong Il's suitability for the top job, he dies in a mysterious car accident. And according to Kim Jong Il's own nephew, who defected, when another official suggests that he should not succeed his father, Kim Jong Il has him shot.
These people were seen to be promoting one of his rivals, so he got rid of all of them, sent them to camps or killed them.
His stepbrother will be quietly sent abroad, never to return. At just 25 years of age, Kim Jong Il is learning his father's blueprint of terror.
Purging is absolutely key in the playbook of North Korean dictatorship. Kim Jong-il purged or forced people into exile or executed them or imprisoned them. But purging goes all through society.
Gradually, the power Kim acquires behind the scenes goes to his head. With his love of the movies, he regards cinema as the perfect means of indoctrinating the North Korean people. He wants to rival his hated enemies in South Korea, who are now producing award-winning films to worldwide critical acclaim. But the North just doesn't have the talent.
He had this dilemma, which was his filmmakers couldn't really learn what was happening elsewhere in the world because he was keeping everybody hermetically sealed away from the world.
So Kim hatches a demented plan.
This is one of the most bizarre episodes with North Korea, and certainly I would say counts as one of the most bizarre episodes in the history of modern movie making.
Chae Eun-hui is South Korea's most glamorous and successful film actress. One day, she receives an unusual invitation to travel to Hong Kong.
The actress was approached by a filmmaker from Hong Kong who was essentially offering her a script to direct and star in.
For several days, Chae is flattered and cajoled until she is asked to accompany the filmmaker to the Hong Kong coast, where a top producer supposedly lives. However, it's all a trap.
She fainted during the process, she says, and woke up on a ship with the beaming face of Kim Il-sung looking down at her from a portrait, taking her to North Korea.
After a 6-day boat ride, Chae finally understands the enormity of her situation. Because Kim Jong Il has come to the North Korean coast to welcome her personally. Having got his South Korean star, he now needs a director. And who better than her estranged husband, Shin Sang-ok, South Korea's most famous filmmaker. Shin is thrown into prison after also being kidnapped from Hong Kong in almost identical circumstances to Chae.
The North Koreans had a torture called the torture position, in which an inmate was asked to sit, legs crossed, back straight, staring dead ahead, 16 to 18 hours a day, without moving a muscle or flinching, and if you did, you'd be beaten or punished. And the logic behind it was that if you sat stock still, that was the only way to think about your crime and to repent. In total, Shin was kept in jail almost 3 years.
Shin eventually agrees to direct films for Kim Jong Il, if they release him.
Shin had just been freed from prison a couple of weeks earlier, given new clothes, fattened up with good food, and was told by the people looking after him, get ready, Kim Jong Il wants to meet you.
5 years after she was kidnapped, Kim Jong Il arranges a party for Che to be finally reunited with Shin Sang-ok. Like making his own film with his victims as actors, Kim directs the whole scene.
Oh, there's somebody I want you to meet. And he creates this drama. I mean, can you imagine this? There she is with the elite of North Korea, party time, and then in comes the kidnapped husband.
Kim Jong Il tells them, come on, well, are you not going to hug each other? So Shin and Che hug, kind of feel dazed.
And Kim's already dreamt up his glorious finale.
He basically said, I got an idea, why don't you get married again? Okay. I'll tell you what, I'll marry you. You know, this man's a nutter.
Shin and Che are forced to make several films for Kim Jong Il, until they escape to the West in 1986. By the 1980s, Kim Il-sung is still dictator of North Korea, a god to his brainwashed people. But behind the scenes, his health is ailing. By removing all his rivals, Kim Jong Il has persuaded his father to choose him as his eventual successor. But as someone with no military experience, he must prove to the army he is worthy of leading them.
He must establish himself as a hard man in a country where the military is elevated to such a high position within the society. He must prove that he is tough. That meant being completely without mercy towards his enemies.
Inspired by his love of James Bond, Kim Jong Il takes charge of North Korea's intelligence services.
Because he never really left North Korea, he sort of took what he saw in Hollywood films to be realism. He thought James Bond films were essentially docudramas about how espionage is done in the West.
He decides to try to finish the job his father started, to attack the South. 7 South Korean cabinet ministers, including the president, are visiting the Martyrs' Mausoleum in Rangoon to pay their respects to a hero of Burma's struggle for independence. 2 days earlier, Kim Jong Il has sent his agents to plant a terrifying surprise for the service. Leaderless, South Korea would be at Kim's mercy. 21 people are killed, including 3 members of the South Korean cabinet. But the main target, the president, survives when his car is caught in traffic and he is late for the service.
Obviously, it was done on the assumption that such an assassination attempt would start a massive anti-government rebellion in South Korea. Of course, it was a pipe dream.
By 1987, with America behind it, South Korea is emerging as a successful and thriving economy, and after years of dictatorship, turning to democracy. It's awarded the 1988 Olympic Games, but Kim thinks they should hold it jointly with the North. With the Cold War still in full swing, he's going to orchestrate a boycott.
North Korea's communist allies were meeting to decide whether to boycott the third Olympics. You know, Moscow got boycotted by the West in 80, Los Angeles got boycotted by the East in 84.
Kim plots a way of making sure the Eastern Bloc vote to ruin South Korea's big day. Unknown to the passengers on board Korean Airlines Flight 858, bound for Seoul, North Korean agents plant a bomb before leaving the plane at a scheduled stop in Abu Dhabi. A 115 people, mainly South Koreans, are killed. In Kim Jong Il's twisted mind, he has given communist nations an excuse to boycott the Seoul Olympics.
The North Koreans were giving them a pretext. It's too dangerous. You've got planes dropping out of the sky. This is a war zone.
But his demented scheme backfires. South Korean intelligence agents trace Kim's bombers to a hotel room in Bahrain. Realizing they're about to be arrested, they attempt to commit suicide with cyanide pills hidden in cigarettes. One succeeds. The other is stopped by the South Korean agents in the nick of time. The female terrorist survives and confesses Kim Jong Il had sent them.
She came off the plane with one of those Asian type of masks on, and I suspect underneath the mask was a leather gag that goes into her mouth, and it stops them biting out their tongue, because the North Korean commandos are trained to bite their tongue and then bleed out.
With Kim's murderous tactics exposed, Eastern Bloc countries vote to go to the South Korean Olympics. The White House brands North Korea a state sponsor of terrorism. But Kim Jong Il doesn't care. Because on July the 8th, 1994, he gets the news he's waited his whole life for. His father is dead, and he will soon be in total control of North Korea. For the people, an already impoverished and repressed life is about to get even worse. Kim Jong Il's reign as North Korea's dear leader brings the country to its knees. Around 1 million people starve to death in one of the world's worst famines of the 20th century. The country becomes so backward, when viewed from space, it lies in almost complete darkness compared to the rest of Asia. Yet rather than an object of pity, Kim Jong Il has turned his country into an international pariah.
North Korea is a regime arming with missiles and weapons of mass destruction while starving its citizens. States like these and their terrorist allies constitute an axis of evil.
But Kim Jong Il is impervious to American name-calling because he keeps his people in complete isolation. They have no idea how the rest of the world view them. No independent information can get in or out. And anyone who disobeys the leader is crushed mercilessly. It's said no other country on earth has more political prisoners than North Korea.
In the beginning of its rule, North Korea had more political prisoners per 1,000 people than Soviet Union under Stalin.
Some estimate 200,000 are locked up for their views.
Anyone who disagrees with the cult of personality, anyone who challenges the authority, the legitimacy of the Korean Workers' Party, the punishments are extremely harsh, right up to, of course, the well-known large gulag prison camp system and widespread use of execution.
Many are tortured for acts so petty, no one in the West would regard them as crimes at all. Kim Jong Il sold seafood to South Korea without the party's permission.
I was tortured in so many different ways. I was tortured with electricity and by water. And also suffered from pigeon torture where I was chained backwards. They chain your hands behind your back onto a hoop 60 centimeters high. So you can't sit down, you can't rest. You can't stand up, your body becomes paralyzed. Then your body becomes all numb and your chest hurts, as if it's going to pop out. The pain is beyond description. You relieve yourself in your pants.
Kim Jong Il is forced to make a false confession that he was a spy working for South Korea. And many more are sent to the same camp for merely expressing unhappiness during the famine.
They were caught because they talked about their troubles living during the arduous march. Most of them just because they complained. And they were people who were caught because they damaged Kim Jong Il's photo or newspapers.
Jung experiences conditions no human being should witness, and which haven't been seen since the Nazi labor camps.
In winter, it goes down to as much as minus 30 centigrade. The ground freezes to almost 2 meters deep, so they never let you bury dead people. In spring, when the ground starts to defrost, we would go into the storage room to dispose of the bodies. It's really miserable to see. Because the bodies had decayed while freezing and defrosting, so they were all tangled. We just had to use shovels to bury them like garbage.
While hundreds of thousands are either starving or locked up, Kim Jong Il carries on his life of excess. In 2008, he disappears for 10 months without explanation. The world waits. Has Kim's lifestyle finally caught up with him? When he reappears, he looks frail and bewildered. Then, on December the 17th, 2011, an announcement is made.
위대한 용도자 김정일 동지께서
Kim Jong Il, North Korea's dear leader, is dead. The outpouring of grief is as hysterical as when his father died 17 years earlier. At first, many in the West hope his death could be a turning point in North Korea's history. After 63 years of brutal dictatorship, there's a chance the country will finally open up and end its self-imposed exile as the Hermit Kingdom. There are even whispers of reunification. The very existence of thriving South Korea just 4 kilometers away, over the DMZ, has come to define the North.
Things that constitute failure to any other leaders, you know, a loss of a war, like the Korean War, a famine, or the fact that your rival country that you're claiming to be the rightful owner of has an economy like a zillion times bigger than yours. None of that seems to affect it. The South Koreans are at the forefront of the modern tech world. The great fortune for the South Koreans is that they were allied with America. So they went the American way. The North Koreans went a different way.
For many, the only hope is to escape.
After I became a defector and settled in South Korea for about 5-6 years, I kept having nightmares about North Korea. I'm still having nightmares about North Korea. The dictatorship is that horrible.
Hopes grow when it's announced Kim Jong Il's third son, Kim Jong Un, is going to take over. He's been educated in the West.
He is the one he's been raised abroad. He's very aware of the rest of the world as it is. He's been exposed to other things that Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong Il haven't.
At just 28 years of age, he becomes the dynasty's third supreme leader.
Kim Jong-un is unusual in many regards. He is very young. Obviously, his father expected to live much longer. It didn't happen. So now Kim Jong-un is in control of the country with very little experience.
Unfortunately for North Korea, he turns out to be even madder than his father. It begins with a bizarre government recommendation. Kim Jong-un announces that the nation should follow new haircut rules. Women can have one of 18 haircuts, but men only one of 10 approved styles. It's a set of rules the supreme leader pointedly ignores. But there is a far darker side to the new Kim.
Kim Jong-un seems to be much more ready, much more inclined to use physical violence. He is obviously ready to kill people whom he knows personally quite well.
He starts by purging his own uncle, who was publicly arrested and shot. He then brutally kills many of his military command with public executions. At the same time, he continues to test nuclear weapons, and his people starve.
When comparing Kim Jong-il and Kim Jong-un, people think Kim Jong-un will be different, but nothing can ever change. There's still a famine. There are still people who are starving to death. So I think it's better not to get your hopes up about Kim Jong-un.
Meanwhile, the man responsible for much of his country's mess, Kim Jong Il, lies embalmed in Pyongyang's mausoleum, quietly watching over his son's reign and the continuing suffering of the North Korean people.
Kim Jong Il was the one who built this Truman Show for the only reason that he would not have any power if it stopped existing. So North Korea today has existed for the sole reason of sustaining the Kims and sustaining that leadership. And that's built on the pain and labor and heartbreak and tragedy of all the people who live there.
But even though it appears as invulnerable as it ever has, some believe the house of cards the Kim family has built could yet come crashing down.
I think the North Korean system is very brittle. It is one family sitting on top, sucking the life out of a society for its own benefit. And when the means to do that cease to be effective, then this thing could be over very quickly.